It's Friday night. I usually go live on Saturdays. Going live on Friday, and I have to apologize. Uh, I had my guest and we were uh, chewing the fat backstage and lost track of time. I'm bring him on here in just a minute. Big Ed, thanks for tuning in. Whiskey Straight Owl from Ireland, thanks for tuning in. But so tonight, got a special guest. I'll introduce him in just a second. We're going to go deep. It's probably going to go long. I've been really looking forward to this all week long. Talking about the journey to becoming a master of Scotch with the Council of Whisky Masters. So pour yourself a dram. Along the way, if you have a question, I'll try to get to them. I'll try to get to them. But you have to put in my name. Hopefully, I'll be able to see that and we'll answer your questions after I ask all my questions. But in the meantime, so pour yourself a dram and cheers. All righty, man. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I've been looking forward to this all week as well too. So let's nerd out.
So before we get talking, I'm going to pour myself a couple of whiskeys. Same bottling, same whiskey, different bottle. So these are both Ardbeg 10s. This is the Ardbeg 10 that I opened up last Saturday and had a WTF moment because this is my 7th bottle and it's since 2016, and it's at least then it was wow. You know what? I'm already smelling it. It's already different from last Saturday. So I was having a shock, and this is my own stupidity. It was so unlike anything I'd ever had before, and I had that oh shit moment of oh no, this is a bad bottle or whatever. It was coming across as back when I was a young kid, we used pencils, and you would write a number 2 pencil on your Scantrons, and maybe you did something. You took a pencil and stuck it in your mouth while you're doing something, And if you picked up a pencil off of someone's desk, it had teeth marks on it.
That's what you get, right?
Yeah, but I had that taste and stuff of that graphite and a pencil and stuff like that, and it was on the nose and the palate. I just smelled it out of the bottle. It's not like that one. But I would do
your original bottle that you have there, the sample one. Sorry, not the original one. That one. Do you know when that is? That the one from back in the day that you're going to be comparing?
No. So this is bottle number. So if you start, this would be probably the one I bought in beginning of COVID.
Okay, so 2020.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
I stumbled upon in some random shop. I found a 10, and then for those nerds that don't know, you can get the bottling code right in the back. And so, like in Ugadale and Corey Brecken, there's like epic bottling numbers. And so this 10 that I didn't even notice, it's from 2018. And so I feel very fortunate. Like I've got it as number 3 here. I've got a few poured out, and yeah.
If I had to do it again, if I knew then what I knew now, I would have saved empty bottles or even saved portions of them.
Yeah.
Maybe put them into a bottle like this, so down the road I can do a comparison of them. But I never would have thought that they could possibly change that much. You learn along the way.
While you're pouring those out there, last night I had the opportunity, kind of unexpectedly, to meet Stephanie McLeod, who's the master distiller for Dewar's, right? Dewar's and Aberfeldy and Craigellachie. She was at an event. I did not know she was going to be there, and she was talking about they're bringing out a whole line of Napa cab finished expressions in single malt and in Dewar's.
Okay.
And one of the questions that I thought was great was, as a master distiller is tasting through these expressions and waiting for them to mature in this finishing period, how do they know when it's ready, and how do they know if they've gone too far? And to your point, one of the things that she mentioned was that whenever they do this, they will pull off their sample and keep it so they can compare what it tasted like at 6 months to 7 months finishing to 8 months finishing, and they can see the progression over time, because it's usually not linear. So yeah, good.
So the other thing is, we're already going off.
We're in it. Let's go.
The other thing is, because of the climate in Scotland, there's sort of a dormancy period of the cask in which there's not a lot of extraction going on because the temperature drops. They're not temperature controlling the warehouses or the dunnage warehouses. And so the best time to take samples is in somewhat warmer months, or to get a gauge on how much interaction, because when you got snow all everywhere until the snow leaves, there's not the extraction in and out of the cask. So to take a sample from, let's just say, December to March, there may not be any real significant difference because there's not a whole lot of interaction going on versus the rest of the year. So it'd be kind of interesting to see how universal. So when do you take your samples, and do you take different samples just for shits and giggles in the middle of the dormancy period to see what the difference is in between them?
Building on that, I used to. I think it was a presentation from a Yamazaki ambassador at some point in time, and they showed their internal process around maturation. And I always just kind of assumed it was linear, right? Early in my whiskey studies, if you will, I just assumed it just kind of got better over time. And they throw this beautiful graphic up that showed absolutely not, right? It could be amazing at 6. It could be terrible at 7. It could be worse at 8. It starts to recover at 9. It gets worse at 10. And so it's a non-linear process. And to your point, right, the discussions that we've had has been they're pulling samples all the time, and they're just tracking it. And Stephanie mentioned something last night where you spend that many years on a distillery or a spirit, and you actually get a feel for it, right? Like it happens to all of us in all of our lives with things that we're familiar with, right? You can't sneak up on a Stillman. You probably can't sneak up on a master distiller and surprise them with something, at 14. But nice surprises happen, and then you get accessible caps and single casts.
So the funny thing is, so as everybody knows, we should do an introduction. Who are these two handsome bald men?
Yes. The official haircut of whiskey studies is.
So as way of introduction, I think the names. I don't know if did you type in your name when you were doing all this stuff?
I think so. It says it says my name. I don't know.
Turn on the screen. It says probably something I need to click.
That's fine.
Screw it. All right. So, as most people know, my background, got into wine in '97, went back to college. And when I first introduced to wine, studied enology. I was in love with the wine country. I was more fascinated by production than just the whiskey itself, than the history, the culture, and so on and so forth. Studied with WSET and learned about that. Learned about the quartermaster sommeliers. Studied with 3 master sommeliers for 18 weeks. Became a certified sommelier. Went back to WSET. Do the diploma, then looking for, and then one of the units for the WSET diploma was on spirits, which introduced me to whiskey, which then changed my path from I think I'd become a master of wine to start getting into whiskey. And immediately I started looking for, where's a whiskey education? Where's a whiskey certifications? Other than there was a spirit certifications with the WSET, but not just whiskey. And so, but they have been popping up now. From Moonshine University, the Edinburgh Whiskey Academy, the guys down in Austin, the Wizard Academy doing their whiskey marketing, and now we have the Council of Whisky Masters. And the Council of Whisky Masters and this was I actually brought it during a discussion in a podcast in Bourbon. What's the name of the channel again? Bourbon.
Oh man, Mark is going to be very upset if I mess this up. Bourbon Life.
Bourbon Life. So, which I listened to last night the Council of Whisky Masters, as I sort of anticipated, is somewhat paralleling these organizations, but it's young. Yeah. And so when I saw this, there's everybody, anything that's new, you're gonna go, is this legit or is this whatever, but when you see the people who are involved, when you see who's on the board, and so on and so forth. As well as when you start seeing the quality of what comes out of it, it's the fruit of it. It's what comes out of it that is going to be the real proof in the pudding, not a coin or a medal or a piece of paper you can frame and hang on your wall, or credentials you can put it next to your name. It's going to be, look what these people are now doing. So we're going to. So that's in a nutshell my journey from getting into wine and getting into whiskey. Now, I'm not sure if it's true, and you can set me straight on this. Okay. Your first name is Siddarth, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
I heard originally it was Sid Jedi. And then you had an Ardbeg 10 and went to the dark side and became Siddarth.
We can't confirm or deny that. Those are our behind the scenes secrets, but
You're supposed to go. I'm your father, Erik.
This is what happened.
Anybody heard make that joke before?
Yeah, I believe it or not, that was not the first time I've heard the Darth Vader joke, but it's all good. It's all good.
I know. All right. So you have an Ardbeg 10. I have two Ardbeg 10s.
I've got a bunch of stuff. I feel like we're going to be here for a while, nerding out. There's a third bald person in the audience here, so bald people unite. But yeah, I feel like we're going to be here for a minute. So is it Whiskey Straight Al? I think he said he was. Yeah, there you go. Whiskey Straight Al, also bald.
Oh yeah. Al. And he's over in Ireland. He's in Ireland. God. So everybody check out Whiskey Straight Al's channel. So I wasn't working in the wine industry. My working industry, so in wine was, as part of going back to college, I had to intern with 3 wineries. So I interned with 3 wineries. I've done part-time work for wineries. I've done side jobs for wineries. I've done consulting for wineries. I was a sommelier for 6 months on weekends just to get the experience. But I've never worked full-time in the industry because it didn't pay enough.
Right.
So you're not a bartender.
No.
You're not working at a distillery. You're not working for a distributor.
That's right.
How we generally I know you're an underwear model, right?
I'm a hand and underwear model. And I market a line of shampoo and conditioner, and I found my way to whiskey via coffee, actually. So I would say my first food and drink love was really coffee. All of this instigated by a woman, a girl that's now my wife, who pulled me along. Yeah, exactly. That pulled me along. So I guess I'm a bartender for her and her friends. That's what ends up happening. That's how I really also went off into the cocktail space as well too. So, but I started in I would say my foundation of sensory and love of liquid starts in coffee. My wife has always been into just a diverse array of spirits and drinks. Was really into wine, started getting into cocktails. And at some point in time, I just kind of made the jump into whiskey. Maybe my roots, as you can tell, I look Scottish. I was born in Scotland. And so obviously I went back to the mother's milk. And here we are talking about Scotch. So I would say that I've been a long time watcher of your channel, Erik, big fan of it. And I think it pulls a certain type of individual, right? It's an individual that's interested in kind of the educational aspect of Scotch and whiskey and spirits. And that's what took me down this path that ended in the exam a couple months ago.
Cool.
So yeah, happy to hear.
So the strengths and weaknesses to my journey in that one of the things while I've had the advantage of, learning to become, sensory analysis and having a formal grid and all that kind of stuff, which is an advantage. The disadvantage is I've had to unlearn things because my mindset, because it's different. Just as driving on the other side of the road and the other side of the automobile in Scotland is different than driving in the United States. You have to, and you kind of do things a little differently and learn how to navigate a roundabout, and learn to love haggis and drink iron brew. But also, and this is a continual process. I'm continuing. Oh, Erik, no, that's a wine way of doing things. You had to kind of change things. And I think last Saturday was definitely. So I did a whole series on deductive and blind tasting, and a lot of this come from the wine world. And I'm like, shit, I got to rethink this. I got to rethink these things. So the disadvantage, you must unlearn what you have learned, as Yoda said to Luke Skywalker. A cousin of yours, I think.
Yeah.
So you generally just turned about a like of these beverages. But 99% of the people out there who like cocktails or whatever, or Scotch, whatever, they're not going nerdy. What inside you goes, man, I'm gonna go deep in on this one.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get borderline divorced
Yeah, that's exactly right. You're reading the room quite well. I got to imagine it's a personality characteristic that I feel like you probably share, where I consider myself a deep diver. So I know very intentionally that once I get into a hobby, I'm going to be, it's going to consume me for the next 4 to 6 years. And I've had a number of these through my life. And so I knew it was going to happen. So I was pretty intentional with it. And look, not dissimilar than perhaps what many people have found. You've got this incredible mixture of history, science, art, all these things blending together in a way that is very personal, right? Like at the individual level and then at the communal level. There is, boy, I feel like we talked about this a little bit backstage or previously, but my undergrad is in computer science, math, and religious studies. And the religious studies part of it is the human element of this, right? And so as nerdy and engineering and as analytical as we want to go, this liquid brings people together. And that's this wonderful intersection. So yeah, that's a little bit about the why.
Oh, okay. Wow. So because I'm in that same personality, which is why I avoid certain things.
Yeah, me too.
Because before I lived here in Half Moon Bay, I lived out in the wine country, and there was a golf course right outside my window, and there were wineries and stuff.
Yeah.
And I know people who get into golf, they become very obsessive. I didn't want to. I moved there because it was a nice neighborhood, not because I wanted to get into golf. But the reason why I never stepped out there and putted, hey, what happened to Erik? Oh, I hear he's starting a golf channel.
Yeah.
Next thing you know, all my free time would be art or anything else. So I there are certain things I'm just like, no, because if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do 110% and balls to the wall, and so limit my obsessions.
I am exactly of the same mindset. I'm exactly of the same approach, and here we are talking about going down blind tasting on a Friday evening. So yeah, this is what happens.
So did you do any other organizations, any other training, or is the Council of Whisky Masters? Gotta keep my terms straight. The first organization you interacted with?
In the spirit space, yes. I feel like I've gone down this path of obsessiveness and accreditation and education in other parts of my life, but for whiskey and spirits,
okay,
yes. And a little bit maybe to what you talked about earlier is that I found myself looking for an organization, like where am I kind of placing my energies and my bets? And there isn't a lot of content out there. Like it's
right.
your 3 videos or 2 videos. I think on the council, you've covered the marketing school. I think you've covered EWA. You're really the only source of information that there is that's not fake marketing that's out there.
Right.
And so I had actually chosen, if you will, kind of gone down this path and then found your videos, and I found what my research matched up I saw with your research. But I mean, you're kind of making a bet on the board, right? Like, who are the people involved? What do they do? What have they done? And I feel, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, I feel like we both made very good bets here, looking at who's been involved, how they're going to be involved, how they have been involved, and some of the opportunities that have opened up to us.
And one of the things is, the challenge is if you're the first one sort of cutting new ground and you're making a path for others to follow, everybody's going to be skeptical. But there are others who are going to come along and benefit from your work, your organization's work. I'm sort of Googling at the same time that I'm talking.
What could go wrong?
So I'm looking at the Council of Whisky Masters. And so there's a risk taking. There's always going to be people who are skeptical. And so but this was the same thing I had with the guys down in Austin.
Yeah.
When they first came along, I'm just like, and I'm watching the channel, and Daniel Whittington and I are friends. Mm-hmm. But I was like, I don't know. Okay. But then I started to learn some things about them. So obviously, you see this big ass dumbass coin hanging around his neck, and I have one of those, and it hurts my neck. I will never wear it. And you look at it, go, this is total jackassery.
Yeah.
And then you watch the channel, this is total jackassery. And then you go, but wait a minute, they're the largest channel that's out there, and you find out this is just a very small portion. of an organization that is one of the, I would say, most amazing schools if you want to be an entrepreneur and how to do the business. And what you realize is that big ass coin is a statement against snobbery. If you can wear this dumbass thing hanging around your neck and act like you're the shit, then you're screwed up in your head. And that's the point.
I love it.
That's freaking brilliant. And so anybody who looks at it and laughs at it, makes jokes about them, you're doing the right thing. Number one. Number two is that's the point. That's the whole point. And Daniel and I, we have certain things that we have in common, and we get along really well, and I think I appreciate about him. But he also thinks very differently. And so when he says stuff, I'm like, no, I think that's bullshit, but I'm going to continue listening. And then I'm going to go, oh, you know what? I think he's got a point.
Yeah.
And then I'm buying. And it's sort of, so you have to kind of, it's perfectly fine to be skeptical, but don't be quick to judge and wait and see what comes out of it. And I took a class with Rex Williams of their name, Daniel Whittington and Rex Williams, his father. And it was like a semester of understanding history, culture, philosophy, and human nature crammed into a day. And my mind was just blown. And then and it's like, this is a secret that most people don't know about. And until you go and when you pull up, I'm sorry, I'm talking about them so much.
Yeah, no,
there's a big wall that says, we are not a cult.
Right.
So and I say all that because, the Council of Whisky Masters or Edinburgh Whiskey Academy or whatever else could put on airs and try to be all hoity-toity, whatever else, and people will quickly see through it. But give them time and see what comes out of it. And I think the proof is going to be in the pudding. And I'm excited to be in what are still the early stages. And, it's still things are going to get tweaked along the way and fixed. And, we can do it better this way. We can do it better. Well, that's just natural. That's what's going to happen. The Institute of Masters of Wine and WSET and the Court of Master Sommeliers, Court of Master Sommeliers America weren't what they are today from originally. They've morphed over time. They've changed over time. And the Council of Whisky Masters will undoubtedly do the same. And so I can either be a part of it and seek to be a positive contributor to it as well as benefit from it, or I could just be at arm's length and just be all negative about it, and be a cynic and really be talking out of my ass because I really haven't met the people. I haven't engaged with the people. I haven't been part of and so you really wouldn't know what the hell I'm talking about. And so I know I'm doing all this talking, man. Eric talks so much. So you decided, okay, I'm going to go for this. You did the level 1 and the level 2. We're going to get to level 3.
Yep.
So here's my first question.
Yeah.
With WSET and the Court of Master Sommeliers, the level 1, level 2 is okay. A 6-inch step, a 1-foot step. The third level, another 6-inch. The fourth, it's like a 10-foot step.
Right.
They're not equal distant from this level to this level to this level. So the level 1 with the Court of Master Sommeliers, it's just read a book. You got 100 questions or so, whatever how many it is, and that's it. You can now do it online. The certified, it's blind tasting. There's a practical exam of 2 wines, a practical exam and theory exam. The advanced, from going from the certified level I'm at to the advanced, is like going from, I don't know, junior high, high school, straight into college. It just jumps. And then the masters. So based on your experience with the level 1 and level 2, and then going to level 3, is it a similar experience?
Yes, it is they're unrelated. Like level 1 and level 2 are self-study. I think that is the sweet spot for probably 90% of the world out there that's interested in kind of this educational and some structured education. That third level is just a absurd move up the difficulty and commitment scale. And it's something that I see the board talking about right? Like at some point in time, there needs to kind of be that step up, if that's what you want to call an individual.
Yeah.
And it happens at level 3. And you actually, I think it was on your last live stream, perhaps, or one of the last blinds that you did, where you called out the difference between identification in a set space where they say, hey, what is the answer to this A, B, C, or D, versus an open-ended question where you just need to recall it in context, frame the answer in the right way to the person that's asking you the question. Those are worlds apart.
It's
worlds apart.
So it's the difference between recognition and knowing it. So if I play oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light? You'd say, what is it? Okay, that's the national anthem. Okay, so what's the title of it? So you recognize it as not who wrote it?
Who wrote it? Yeah.
What was the historical context and so forth? And there's a difference between, so there's levels of how well you know that, but there's also a difference between recognition and be able to just say, oh, that's and name it. So there's a difference between a multiple choice, which I recognize it's got to be number C. And usually in multiple choice, 2 answers are going to be way off and 2 are going to be real close.
Right.
So if you're good at taking exams, just having a skill at taking exams, you're going to narrow it down to 50-50.
So I think you take a little bit of what you mentioned before and you combine it with this, and that's kind of why I went down this path, right? So you need to have some curious skepticism. You need to have both. You better be skeptical for anyone asking you for money to do something, especially when they're new. You should be curious, like you said, and be like, oh, screw this or don't screw that. Do a little bit of exploration. Right now, it's a little bit of a privilege to be able to spend money and explore it, but you've got channels like this, so the word is getting out. And then you kind of combine it, and you go down this path and see, like, what are they trying to do with this, and what does that output, that level 3, that next step output look like, and kind of, is it worthwhile? So I'll tell you, like, I was absolutely skeptical going into it. Like, it is a big time, energy, and financial commitment. You talked about the fact that you're looking at around a floor of 75 whiskeys that you probably want to procure in order to get past the blind tasting, and that's 1/3 of the exam. Like, that's to speak nothing of the written on the oral component of it. So it's a non-trivial amount of time, energy, resources, physical space, financial space. So
and how many weekends and after hours where you could be doing something else, and yet I got to study.
Oh my gosh. I think I shared this with you backstage, but I got the last 2 months before the exam, I actually don't remember what else was going on in my life, quite frankly. Like, I've got a bucket of kids. So the kids had to have been fed, and they survived. So, but my goodness, it was like anything else worth doing, right? At a higher level, it starts to consume you. It kind of in a good way. I'm very happy to be on the other side of it, only for us to get ready to do level 4 here when y'all are out back in Scotland.
Right. So it was mentioned. So in the podcast that you did, with the Bourbon dudes, and we talked about it, and I've talked about it, I put links to it, is the movie Somm. The movie Somm came out in 2013. And it came out, I think, in the spring of 2013. I started the study with the Master Somms in September 2013. No, late September, early October 2013. And then we finished in March 2014. Then we had the exam. That movie, I was do I want to spend this money this time? That movie was a major source of motivation, as well as at least a glimpse of what it would be like. And it just so happened, then it turned out I'm in the class, and who ends up being one of the instructors? Ian Cobble.
Yeah.
Who's the first guy, the blonde-haired guy who you see in it. But you see the insanity, and they talk about the insanity of it, and they interview the wives, and Jeff Kruth says the happiest person when you pass is not the Master Somm, it's the wife.
My wife and my friends were thrilled.
It's like, God, can we be done with this already? Can we get back to life? And they always talk about, can we get back to life? Now, I have no life. I have no wife. I have no kids. So I'm pretty, although my work is pretty consuming, And that's my main thing. That's gonna. Hey, Top Shelf Dustin, how you doing, man? So, but you mentioned that as well. So, in terms of if you want to, at least I know it's wine.
Mm-hmm.
If someone were watching it, you can watch it on, and I put a link to it in my Facebook group. You can now watch Somm, SOMM, the first movie. You can watch it free now on YouTube. And the Somm 2 is free, and then they're going to be coming out with Somm 4 shortly. Go watch that movie if you're considering this kind of study, and just think, okay, what if they were doing whiskey rather than wine?
Yep.
Am I willing to put that kind of effort into it? Is that sort of, we would say, parallels to your experience in terms of effort?
Yeah, because when I went down, so I was trying to study for the very first time this level 3 was there, and there was no guidance. There's like a website, and there's a website that tells you kind of here's what's covered, and that's it. And so the only reference I had was the Somm movie. And so I basically have watched that movie. I don't know. I watch it every month or so. Like I watch it all the time because it's the closest thing I could find to a study approach. Like what should we do? And the problem or the challenge or the opportunity of studying for something like this is it's almost an unbound problem in that there's no curriculum that says we're only going to ask you questions in these topics. Like the topic is Scotch. Okay. Awesome. That's freaking helpful. Thanks, guys. Right. And even in that known distiller space of 24, I mean, holy crap, you got 75 to 100 core ranges that could show up. Right. I mean, it's effectively an unbounded problem.
So what distillers in Isla use a rake and plow mash tun rather than a lautern?
Yep. And when did Bruichladdich put that in, and why do they use it, and what are the flavor contributions they get?
Yeah. So I mean, it's that kind of jump into it. So in one sense, the whiskey world is smaller than the wine world. There's over 3,000 different grape varieties. Italy has over 1,500 alone. You obviously have radically different classification systems. There's basically an old world, a new world, and on and on and on. But but whiskey, you can go. It's difference between astronomy and and the micro world. And looking at the stars through a telescope versus looking at the micro world through a microscope, and how far deep you want to go into it. And it's just a matter of, okay, more is going to be required, and we're going to go even deeper into what is expected of you based on the focus of this. And that in sense makes it challenges. I'm not trying to figure out, what kind of whiskey is this? What's the base ingredient? We already know that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying to figure out the region and somewhat within Scotland. That's a given. That means the emphasis has to be put on a lot more difficult things that could be on the exam that you need to know, because those other things which you have to figure out in a wine tasting, or if you're just tasting whiskey in general rather than specifically Scotch, are already covered, and so they're going to go even deeper on these other things.
Yeah.
So.
The challenging thing is you still have to keep the big picture in mind, right? I mean, I feel like it would be a very easy mistake to get too obsessed with the minutia and lose what the spirit is about, and lose what is it, kind of some of the bigger picture stories and narratives in the space.
So what was your, so now your background, then getting into it, we talked about, sort of being inspired. I've literally, Somm 1,
mm-hmm.
I've watched more than any other movie that exists.
Me too. And I saw that movie and I was like, there was a deep affection and attraction towards that level of expertise and knowledge. And to me, the level 3 is that analog in the spirits world right now.
So, and I have in fact on this laptop that's in front of me, I have it on there. So when I'm flying on an airplane, it's become sort of a custom for me to rewatch the movie. It's sort of a motivational thing.
This is turning into an infomercial for Somm, and
I know
it's a great. But it is a great movie, and you don't have to be into wine. I tell people it's not a wine movie.
Right.
You may think it's a wine movie. It's actually about what does it mean to pursue something at a high level and be dedicated about it and commit to it in these kind of unbounded spaces. And it is a fascinating movie.
Well, I'm hoping Jason Wise tunes in, then he'll make a movie about whiskey. He's the producer director of the movies. So then, okay, so now your method of studying, then what did you do? Like, okay, typically what would you do for preparation?
Yeah, so I think I think it's going to depend on the individual, but for me, the easiest part was the reading aspect was the easiest part. Like that's the lowest hanging fruit. So I went through all the books kind of repeatedly. I think the biggest takeaway that from Somm that I pulled into this kind of whiskey exam was it's a group effort. This is better as a group effort. It's better when you've got someone else going towards that same endpoint, and you can call it what you want, shared suffering or whatever it is. We know that focused individuals that come together in groups tend to perform better. You see this in the military, you see it in all types of high performing spaces. And so in this kind of path, I found someone else that was of the same mindset, Adam, and I think he was the other person on the podcast, and we went through the books. We went through the books repeatedly to the point where, I mean, if someone were to give me some passage, this is right before the exam. If you were to give me a passage or something, like I knew what author it was, I knew where in the book it was. Side note, so the first night of the week of exams, they host a dinner for everyone.
Oh, nice.
And for our dinner, one of the many incredible people there was Lou Bryson. And so for those in the bourbon space, Lou Bryson masterclass tasting bourbon. Yep, it is one of the best books on production, introduction to production, whiskey masterclass. And one of my favorite parts in that book is towards the end where Lou tries to put together what he calls like a theory of everything. How do you compare production processes and philosophy in bourbon versus Scotch? Whereas in Scotch, you've got choices on either ends. He kind of like, hey, your cask makes a big difference. The way you cut it, the cut points make a big difference. In bourbon, it's a little bit different because the cask part of this is kind of fixed, right? You've got a big variable component. Right. It's charred new oak, and it's going to be charred new oak. And yes, you can decide what degree of char you're going to do, but really, it's the mash bill side of it. It's earlier in the process, and so. My goodness, he's literally sitting there at dinner, and we get the opportunity to just talk through this like worldview framework that he has, and like, holy crap, that is what an absolute privilege to be able to talk through someone like that at that space. So yeah, it's been interesting.
So I mean, also my brain's going down this rabbit trail.
Yeah, I know.
I don't want to talk about bourbon.
ADD folks, get on together and drink a dram and start nerding out.
We don't want to talk about those guys. So because obviously there's a lot more use in terms of single malt versus bourbon is the column still or a combination of stills or the hybrid still, and then obviously the placement you think about the climate of Kentucky and other states. Where it's placed, in the rick house. Yeah. Now, obviously, there's climate change differences, subtle ones between a warehouse versus a dunnage warehouses. Elgin up there near Glenmory is slightly warmer than some other areas of Scotland. So yeah, and obviously there's the oceanic influence. You can pick up an old Pulteney or Bunnahabhain and stuff like that, but it's not as extreme as in the bourbon world, and to the nth degree where that becomes the major flag for Scotch whiskey. But yeah, so in terms of having the big picture, so it's by way of contrast, not just what it is, but what it isn't, and by way of contrast, how does that contrast reflecting differences in the styles of the whiskey?
And then what are the choices available to a distiller or producer? What does innovation look like in these two spaces? They're different based on the regulations and what's allowed in the countries and what's available in the countries, and then what's classically acceptable. But I think you're going to start to see, the role of the, let's call it traditional distiller in both bourbon and in Scotland and in all these developing countries is going to be to deliver the classic spirit, if you will, that we love at scale, right? Like there's only so many people that can deliver this every single year at scale.
What's that one, by the way?
This was a Lafroig 16.
I know it's okay. There, I'm going to zoom in on you real quick if I can get this to work and not screw it up.
Hey,
I almost removed you. How do I zoom in? Okay,
I've got 4 different ones. This is wow.
There you go.
Extreme close up. So there you go.
Okay,
48% Lafroig 16. Look, there's no. It does not ever make sense for a small distiller or producer to try and replicate that. It's a waste of time. What you want to do is go explore other spaces around yeast, around production methods, around cut points, around cask and cask maturation and finishing. And boy, I feel like I heard someone talk about what does it mean to take staves from different sources of not only Quercus, oak, but then different finishes. What happens if you've got 2 different wine finishes that get put together to be put into a hoggy? Anyway,
right.
We're veering wildly off here, but yeah.
So you go Limousin oak, or even start mixing staves of different kinds. That sounds like something what's his name, Glazier would do. Over at
at Compass Box.
So groups, if you can, form a study group. If you study for
so we went way off there. So I formed the study group. I got all the books. Basically, the entry point is memorize the books. There's 10 books. It's not that much. You have a 6-9 month runway. You can read them many, many times. The interesting exercise that we started to do was you're gonna find a mistake in every single book. There's no book out there in these spaces that don't have mistakes. Try to reconcile those differences.
It's kind of funny.
Yeah,
I posted a few pictures of them.
Oh yeah, it happens all the time. I think one of the things that you posted was, did they have like Kalila or Bunnahabhain in the wrong spot of Isla? It was something absurd.
Oh, the map.
The map. The map was insane. Like it was, I don't know. It was like someone put California where Florida was. Like that's how ridiculous.
Sorry. Yeah, it's in this one.
Yeah, you're the place. While you pull that picture up, it's get the books good enough or know the books well enough that you can start to reconcile the differences, and be able to explain them, right? Because different authors explain it in different ways. You need to be able to explain it yourself. You need to be able to deliver like a quick 60-second answer to any question that could come from it. So I'm constantly asking myself whenever I'm reading something, if I were to test someone on this chapter or this knowledge, what are the questions that I would ask that person? And so I spent a lot of time reverse engineering all the parts of the book. For those of you that don't know, you can go to the Council of Whisky Masters website, and there's a set of questions that they will end up pulling from. Yeah. So the top shelf, Dustin just said he needs the book on tape. To be clear, for all these books, I have it in Kindle format, physical format, and Audible format. Okay. I have them in all formats. So to your point, when I'm taking the kids to school in the morning,
good use of your commute time.
Yeah, every single moment that I had some mechanism to take that information in. And then, so that's the reading part of it. Let's call that the foundational thing, foundational knowledge. There's the reverse engineering. What are the questions that anyone would ask? Like if Lou Bryson was sitting in front of you and wanted to talk to you about whiskey production, what are the questions that he would ask you to know if you actually read his own chapter? So that's a daunting task, but it'll drive a level of focus and understanding unlike anything else.
So flashcards, obviously, I mean, when I went to Quartermaster Ways, I had stacks and stacks. So I would have a stack of cards like this, a rubber band around them. Maybe this stack of cards is just the Rhone, just the Rhone Valley of France. Yeah. So I'm at work, and I would take a stack of those out of that stack and put them in my pocket.
Yep.
While I'm at work, every once in a while, I would pull one out. What are the 13 approved grapes for Chateauneuf du Pape? And pull them out. So but by the end of the day, I've gone through that stack, whether while you're eating lunch or you're sitting on the shitter or you're on the phone, waiting for someone to pick up while you're listening to music, and then I would exhaust it and then put another stack in my pocket. So all day long, I'm carrying around stacks of cards. So one of the things I'm doing, as I said before, to be a part of a study group is difficult. And I'm planning on is making flash shorts videos that, there's 58-second, 60-second videos that you can do on YouTube. But it's not, that'll be a source so I can go through my flashcards on my videos.
Mm-hmm.
it's actually the making of the videos that grows it into your head. Sort of like, yeah, you can buy cards that have the answers, or the quiz
Yeah.
or whatever on YouTube. It's the manually writing on the card that grills it into your head.
The teacher's the one that ends up learning it, right? So fake yourself out and become the teacher of your study group or whatever it is.
Yep.
Then it was that there's 24 questions that are on the website. And so it's up to you as to what level you want to go to with respect to answering those. But I took the full-throated version of writing out full on essays for every single one of them. Again, it's this exercise in, if I can capture all the knowledge for this question, it's probably a good exercise, because I'm going to have to go back to different books and find different sources and codify all that into a coherent argument, top to bottom, whatever the question is. Should this region be classified, X, Y, and Z, or is this region better than that region? Or, tell me why Campbelltown faced a decline in the 1800s. They're great questions to force.
And that's a little bit like the WSET diploma.
Okay.
Yeah, in terms of essay questions, that's sort of reflective of that, which is interesting. So there is almost a little bit, and some of this is a little bit sort of like the quartermaster malaise in blind tasting stuff, but a little bit like WSET, an approach into terms of essay questions and writing those out too.
And to that point, like, I don't know how, most of us these days sit on email and phones, and we're really good at writing in 10-second increments. It is a next, like, people like in the exam, like people were having a hard time actually writing for that long. It's a 2-hour block where exactly. Now it's not pencil. It's typed, which is great. But it's typed. So, I mean, like, I think, again, you had mentioned on a previous live stream, you can move your stuff around and up and down. But I'll say that if you don't know kind of what those answers are ahead of time, like, you better not be figuring anything out while you're there. You better know that stuff. And it should be, how do I communicate this the most effectively, concisely?
And they can, and judges, they know if you're just bullshitting and filling in space.
Yeah,
it's different fluff. So that's good, because my handwriting is horrible to begin with.
Yeah.
And number two, so I mean, when I went through college, it was the blue books.
Yeah.
And then the WSET, you were given an envelope, and then when the clock goes, you may now begin. You open up the envelope, you take out the booklet or whatever, and you're writing. It's handwriting. And my problem is my brain's not strictly linear.
Mm-hmm.
So I would be writing. All of a sudden, I start thinking, oh, shit, I should have said this part up here.
Yeah.
And so I would kind of try to squeeze it in or whatever. But, I don't want to piss off whoever's going to read this thing. So, they're squinting or whatever. And then after an hour of writing, it's just like my handwriting just sucks. Yeah. So there was actually skill so what I would do is I would have a side piece of paper. I would create an outline.
Mm-hmm.
When your dates pop in your head,
you gotta get them out.
And if you don't capture them, you're going to lose them. So scribble down whatever. Scribble down. So I would first start off. I would write it sort of an outline, some basic thoughts, names, dates, places that your brain goes, and I would jot those down, and then take those as pieces of a puzzle, and then formulate my short essay on whatever the question is. And that's that's the approach I would take to it.
I think I see some folks here in the chat. I got to imagine the real mystery, or the things that people are curious about, is like, how do you study for the blind tasting part of it, right? Like, and so I'll share a little bit about what I did. So sorry, do you want to go there, Eric, or is there something?
Yeah, in fact, I would say that's probably the number one thing I'm trying to figure out. But before we're going to talk a little bit about these whiskeys.
Yeah,
we'll get into that. We'll keep the people suspense. So if people watched my live stream last Saturday, I did a neck pour of this one. This is a remnant of the previous bottle. I'm happy to say this no longer smells like pencil shavings and a burnt eraser. Everything has come together. This gets affirmed to me over and over and over again. Don't judge a whiskey by a neck pour. It's very, 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 very similar to Sorry.
It's gone.
Thankfully, I had the cap on it. It's very, very similar to the previous bottle. The main difference is it seems slightly livelier and fresher, but that's because it's not been as open as long. It's and things are a little bit more. This one's here, this part here, this part here, this part here, this part here. Whereas this is they've all melded together. Oh, so you have a bunch of friends over, you're making a pasta dish or something, and then you have leftovers. It tastes better the next day when the guests aren't there, or barbecue, because all the ingredients of what you cook for dinner has now become really ingrained into the food, and now it tastes better the next day than it did the day when you're originally serving it. That's sort of the experience with these two whiskeys. But generally, I feel good. I'm not pissed off that this isn't going to be this is going to be a great whiskey. But it was funky on the neck part. Anyway, so what's your impression of Ardbeg? Are you a big fan, or just it's okay, or where you at with the Ardbeg?
I feel like my journey with Ardbeg perhaps mirrors what a lot of enthusiasts have gone through. It's like you first come into whiskey, like this stuff is amazing. Like look how many options there are. And you start trying to chase after all the committee releases, and a couple years into that, you're like, what have I done? Like I've like this is a never-ending journey to try and acquire them. And then you kind of start to figure out, are you an Oogie guy or a Corey guy? Like, you kind of go maybe down one of those two paths, and it becomes one of those. And so I tend to really like some of the classic Ardbeg. Like I think I shared earlier. So my Ardbeg that I've got here is a 2018. It's old, it's older, and early Ugadals and early Corvreckens are just out of this flipping world. So yeah. I think what's ended up happening for my whiskey journey is that, like, for the main brands that we kind of hear, I know a little bit of what I like. I have a ton of samples, and I go and I source a ton of samples. So I will go and try everything. But then I keep kind of coming back to some of the stuff that I like, and I'd rather have fewer whiskeys that I really love versus at one point in time, I was just trying to collect everything, right? I was, my house was completely overrun with it. Now post-exam, I'm trying to post-exam, I'm trying to.
Welcome to my world.
Yeah. I love it. I love the background here. Like you can see everything from a Deanston all the way to Jura and the Long Row.
Yeah, and then there's stuff off camera that way and off camera that way.
I'll tell you what, the sleeper hit for folks that I think hopefully they caught this review, it's the Glen Turret in that lower right-hand corner down there. Like, don't sleep on that. So for those of you that don't know, lower left down there, the former master distiller from Macallan came over and took that over. And boy, did he do a number on that.
And it was magical from the get-go. The first time I popped the cork, you had that, what's his name? George Takei moment. Oh, my. Oh, my. I mean,
yeah.
Sulu, for those who don't know.
That 10 and the 12 are every year you'll get a couple of whiskeys that just punch way out of their price point. And the 2020 and the 2021, the maiden release in the next year after, for those of you that are paying attention on the live stream, try and go find those. And I would say that you can save a crap ton of money by not going for the super high age statement ones compared to the 10 and the 12.
So one of the things I'm kind of curious about this one, it'll probably take a decade to know. And I comment in my video, they used to do mashing by hand
mashing,
but now they have a lauder or semi-lauder, and I'm wondering. Wow, I wonder how that's going to affect things. And I'll probably be dead by the time the 10-year-old comes back.
Don't say that. You got at least another 9 years.
I'm an old man.
11 years.
I'm an old man. By the time we start seeing out of it, so always means then you hear that people like, oh, I remember Glen Turret 10 when they used to do it by hand in the mash tun. Oh, it was the good stuff. None of this fancy, louder tun stuff. Oh, they should have gone back to the hand stuff. There's always someone who wants to claim that the old stuff had to be better than the new stuff, and they should have never changed the label on there or whatever. So
there are two things in the comment section that I just want to
mention.
One, John, your question about what do you do after level 3 table that. We'll talk about it probably on the back half of this because we'll talk about what happened after the exam. And then the other thing was, oh, look at Top Shelf Dustin's picture. Hell yeah, Springbank 25. I'm rolling. Yeah, I've got my second for the night is
Dustin. Him, a whiskey isn't whiskey until it's 20 years old.
There's for those of us old enough to remember the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off. If you have the means, I highly recommend it.
So Dustin has a channel, and they do the stuff that other people just jerk off to. He does. He does. That's a man who does nice whiskeys.
I love it.
And I also kid him, we joke around a lot together. We're frequently both on. There's a guy down in Australia, Scotch Down Under. He does like 8-hour live streams. His whole channel is just live streams, and it's really just hanging out.
Wow!
And so I'll jump in there for a while, and Dustin will be in there. I guys in there. And it's a lot of fun. It's not a video you would watch on the replay necessarily, but it's more of like the event in the moment. Kind of, and they'll talk everything from politics to whatever, and not just whiskey. They go around, and they'll even have arguments and call each other bad names and question each other's parenthood and
like any good hangout session with your friends.
Yeah.
Top Shelf Dustin, which 25 vintage do you have in that picture?
Oh, I'm gonna guess is it Springbank?
It is, but I'm saying so each of those years is different. So I'm wondering what year that is because they all taste. I'm a massive Springbank fan, so
okay.
Yeah. Anyway,
so we're gonna talk about blind tasting.
Yeah,
a good segue to first talk about these whiskeys just a little bit. This is the area I'm most curious about in terms of the approach. Even though it's both wine, the way you approach wine and analyze wine. WSET versus quartermaster sommeliers, it's different. And so I study not just this topic, but for the professor in the college. So when I went to college, and I got a master's and doctorate and all that, I have Dr. Schmuckatelli, next in this fall semester. What books and articles has Dr. Schmuckatelli written? So I'm going to the library. This is before the internet. I'm old. So you go to library, whatever, you search around, you find what books he's read, and you find out how he writes and who does he like and who does he write about. You find articles and journals or whatever else, and you become familiar with that teacher so that you can kiss up. And when you're writing your term paper or writing essay exams, you quote or make references to his books or his favorite authors. And you write in a structurally in a way, the way they want to hear it. So there's some differences between WSET and the quartermaster sommeliers, and I'm not as big on the WSET as the court is. So in that thinking, okay, now I'm trying to gear my head to how do I need to best study for this exam? And so I want to know, how did you study blind tasting, and mentally, what was the tactical approach? I guess, I don't know, like a better word.
It's a great question. I think everyone starts out maybe the same way. So I'll tell you how I started out and then how I shifted and how it ended up going well. I think the first way that everyone tries to do it is to drink it and try to remember it. Like, this tastes like Ardbeg 10, this tastes like Ugadal, this tastes like Korabrecken. And that'll scale a little bit. Like, there's probably a handful of distillers that you can get your arms around and be like, I know these distillery characteristics because I love them. Like, I know what Springbank tastes like. I know what Ardbeg tastes like. You'll have a few of those. It doesn't scale to 24, right? That's the problem. So I probably spent a couple months trying to do that.
Unless you want a liver transplant. Maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, not good for the health, that path. So the next path was, the next evolution of that was, I think, kind of where you might be right now, which is doing kind of distillery focused efforts, not in a blind context at all. So I think about this as a way I would think about sports, where you got to separate like training from game day, and confusing those two is a big mistake, right? Don't confuse your training with the game that you're trying to play. So I would do kind of what you're doing here. I would have 4 or 5 Ardbegs in a row, and I would spend time trying to identify, like, what is it that makes this Ardbeggy? Like, what is
Ardbegian?
What's the Ardbegginess in here? And then if I couldn't figure it out just from those 4 or 5, I would pull something that I thought I would get it confused with, whatever it might be. Kalila, Lecheg, whatever.
Versus
It's going to be different for different folks. Like, I think Lecheg and Ardbeg could not be more dissimilar. Like, I had Lecheg.
Well, you're wrong, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. And so to me, I quickly figured out, all right, there are standard tasting notes out there. The way my palate interprets it and captures it is different. So I started focusing on, what do I find kind of consistently in these? And then what I would do is I would incrementally kind of test this against something else. Okay, I think I know what Ardbeg is. I would have 2 Ardbegs and 2 Lagavulins. Can I find the Ardbegs? And then, so what I did is I basically iterated through all 24 distilleries that way.
Sort of a weird Waldo.
Yeah. What is it that makes Springbank a Springbank? What is it that makes Glenlivet a Glenlivet? And then, yep. And then I was intentionally working to find things that I thought would be easily confused. I don't need to put Glenlivet next to an Ardbeg. Not at this point, anyway. Later on in the process, that was a big part of it. But at the beginning, it is identify what is the closest thing to a distillery character. Right. Make sure I can figure out what are the different production and kind of, production influences in this, right? So if we know that, because one of the factors for kind of the evaluative process in the blind tasting is, I think there's like a production, it's on the website, but it's production. I think maturation might be one of them. Age is one of them. ABV is one of them. Right. Quality is there. Peat is there. And so I basically created my own version of the WSET chart, if you will. You need to come up with your own version of, how do I methodically go through any given spirit and make sure I can figure out the ABV, the cask, the production, the age, where it's from, who I think it might be. And so I started using those, I guess, like a vertical or horizontal, if you will, a horizontal for the distillery to refine my process. And then I started introducing the things that I thought would confuse me. Like, if I wanted to beat me, what would I do? I would put, these 2 Islas together, or these 2 Spaceides together. And then I started incrementally adding one at a time. And then it was about 2.5 months before the exam. And at that, maybe 3 months, when I started running full 8 blind flights, almost on a daily basis. And so, it's part of this is that it's a little bit of an endurance event. Yeah, not for the drinking part of it, but just having your.
Were you spitting?
I was nosing is primarily what I was doing.
Oh, okay.
Right. I mean, look, we talked about this a little bit before. If you are able to spit and that is your process, knock yourself out. It wasn't really my mechanism, but
right.
Yeah.
Sort of on that note. So the funny thing, knowing some MWs, Masters of Wine and Master Sommeliers, is how different they can all have different approaches and how they do things.
Yep.
It's like different pitchers in baseball or different guitarists. They can achieve, the same or similar ends and yet approach it a different way. There's one particular Master Sommelier. You think of analyzing on the nose, what you've done doing the wine, then do the palate. He takes maybe 1 to 2 whiffs and then goes straight to the palate. Yep. Most of his analysis is off the palate, and he's the only one I know who's done that.
I feel like we know. I mean, we've all noticed it. You know something, you'll know something. Whatever, you can nose it for minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Take a sip, and that next nose is immediately going to be different because the context on your palate and what's happened retronasally is completely different. And so, the most important thing is figure out whatever it is that you want to do and dial that in. I would say that, to John's question earlier, one of the things that happened as a result of passing was I got invited to sit as a guest judge for the International Whiskey Competition. So, John, one of the things that happened as a result of this is, you get invited to do really interesting things. And for this competition, the results of which were posted yesterday morning, just came out. we had to taste 240 whiskeys over a 4-day period. You're spitting everything. And so previous to this experience, I would have, when I took the exam for the level 3, I was not spitting anything out at all. So I was, sipping it, drinking it, and using that to get the finish.
Right.
You spend 4 days going through 240 whiskeys and you're spitting it. I now have the ability to go through these, take it on the palate, spit it out, and get the finish. Because that's the thing that people are looking for, right? Why is it that wine and spirits are different? Normally, you're swallowing it in order to get some finish. You can start to develop that skill if you're willing to do it at scale, volume, and intensity with spitting. The most important thing is you just pick a path. If the path is that you want to spit, make sure everything you do moving forward is spitting. If what it is that you want to do is you want to get the finish from swallowing, you're going to have to build a little bit of endurance and tolerance to be able to go through 8 marks in that time period. But that's the path I went down. I was like, all right, I've always swallowed. That's what I know. That's how I know to register the finish. That's how I know to get the retronasal. So about 3 months before is when I was doing 6 to 8 almost every single day. And then I would be nosing it and occasionally tasting it. And then probably within 2 months of the whiskey, of the exam, I was tasting everything.
Okay. Would be interesting. What I would like to do is now do other interviews with other people who pass exam and compare the different approaches.
Yeah.
Just see how different they are. Because, we could talk about sports. We could talk about studying for academic exams or whatever, and the different approaches there are that people have to doing something. And so there's a sense in which temet nosce, Latin, know yourself. Okay.
Absolutely.
Is you need to know what works best for you, figure yourself out in order to figure out the approach that you're going to take to learning this. So I would say we're learning from one way in which a particular person has found success. There's a potential. There are some other answers, but there's still going to be a discipline and a consistency and a constancy and a methodic approach. Whether you're taking a master of wine approach to a wine, or a certified or a master sommelier, because masters of wine, and I've had great discussions between MWs and masters of wine, master sommeliers, is the difference in how they approach. And there's only 4 people who are both. Doug Frost is a master of wine and master sommelier, but he's like insanely, he's almost a savant in wine. He's one of the funniest guys and greatest guys to listen to. Anyway, is you have to figure out yourself out and the approach you're going to take and what's actually doable. But this is a commitment, not only in terms of time, but money. And you have to go, okay, is this going to be worth the cost? And then the dedication to do that and make that commitment to do it.
The health aspect of it, like you're jacking up your life, kind of trying to figure out when do you taste this stuff. Like the exam, I think for the last couple of years, the blind tasting portion is like at 9 o'clock in the morning. Right. I like my job. I cannot be doing 8 blind tastings at 9 o'clock in the morning and go and be useful in that job.
I don't think they'd be really good. I have a 9 o'clock meeting on Tuesdays, an 8 o'clock meeting on Wednesdays, a 9 o'clock meeting, video on Thursdays.
Yeah.
And somehow, okay, sure.
Listen, it would be very entertaining for the first time, and then very quickly you would.
Oh crap! This is a video. Hold on. Yeah, no, my camera's not working right now during the meeting. I'm sorry, it's not working right now. Eric, is that sipping that we hear? What are you doing? Oh, I'm just drinking my coffee, man.
That's right. So yeah, I think that's you. And I preface this like this is the way I went about it. I think the folks that I did study with, people end up orienting towards something in this space. But I think to your point, like how much time on the nose, how much time on the palate, what does it look like? What is the process? What do you do first? I'll say that for me, I spend less time on the nose than I used to, because to me, I get the most interesting from a combination of nosing, quick palate back to nose, palate back to nose, get the finish. And the first thing I'm looking for when I'm tasting is I'm trying to capture what is the ABV, because that's the The ABV is
Structure.
what is
Structure.
you're
So
giving me
there's
the
aromas, flavor, and then structure. Aromas, flowers, fruit, earth,
Mhm.
spice, and
Yep.
other.
Yep.
And then structure is, well, in wine it's acid, alcohol,
Yep.
tannin.
Yep.
In whiskey we're talking about basically alcohol, but also structure in terms of entry, middle, and length of
And finish.
finish.
Yeah. Like, yeah, some complexity, some body, some alcohol,
Right, right,
warming, cooling. What does the mouthfeel look like? Mouthfeel, like to me, like Ardbeg has a very specific type of cooling effect compared to other Islas, which are warming to me. And that to me is an immediate delineation of what does this decision chart look like as to what path am I going down. And
right.
so yeah, so I am so while a score or evaluatory sheet may have the nose or aromas first, my internal one, the one that I use, actually has kind of the body first, the alcohol first, and then you kind of start iterating from there. So and so then over time I just started adding more and more and more, and I tracked what would I continuously mistake. Where are the mistakes happening? What are the two things I'm getting confused on? And those are the ones that I would go back and revisit time and time and time again. The other thing that I think I do differently than most everyone that I've encountered is I love all of my marks to have a lot of air. I think a lot of
You call these marks?
Yeah, I call marks expressions. Yeah, whatever.
Okay.
I like them to have a lot of air. I don't pour and drink. I pour and let them sit for 20, 30, 40 minutes and then try to go through the process. And so I think I'll say that I originally started out wanting it to be poured, covered, and then immediately evaluated. And maybe not dissimilar than what you saw on the 10 last time, it has a very distinct difference with how you evaluate something, because you get those high alcohol flavors coming off immediately, all the volatiles. It's hard. It can be brutal. So my process is I'm looking for at least 20 minutes, and I'm happy for it. I don't care if it's out for an hour before.
But the challenge, there's several challenges with that. And it is, one is, well, the way you're doing it at home isn't necessarily how the way the judges are doing it.
Yep.
One of the things that was nice is they did, when I took the certified and did the blind tasting, and this worked for us and against us, they did say, hey, when you go in there, the wines are ready. They've been poured and they're ready. You don't have to worry about them opening up. The challenge was, so the two wines we had, the white wine was a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, and the red was a Brunello, which is Sangiovese, out of Italy. The problem was, so there was probably, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 people taking the exam. Half went into this room to take the exam, half went to that exam to take the exam, and then they get proctored. And then they have these tables, and then the two wines are there, and you have the paper and so forth. I walked into the room. Before I even sat down, I already knew what the white was.
Wow.
Because I could, it was, if you're familiar with New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, it is unbelievably
Pyrazines? Is that what it is? Pyrazines?
Well, yeah, it has that. There's green notes, but it is unbelievably pungent. It is extremely pungent and very distinctive than, say, the Loire or Steen from, actually Steen is Chenin Blanc, not Sauvignon Blanc, but a Sauvignon Blanc from California or any other classic region. And I was like, holy cow, man. I mean, it jumps out of the freaking glass. And it was so strong and so pungent that I could smell it walking into the room, that when I go to whether is a Brunello, it smells like Sauvignon Blanc because it's just permeating in the air. And so, and we had spit cups, and the problem, so I would spit into a cup, and well, what did I spit in that before I was doing the Brunello? Well, I'd been spitting Sauvignon Blanc in it. Now I'm spitting Brunello in it, and it's splashing.
Oh, back at you.
Sauvignon Blanc in my face. So the fact that they had pre-poured it helped in one sense, except for it was like one of the most aromatic wines out there, and very, very distinctive as to its locale. But anyway, but if the exam on test day is they bought a bottle of whatever the whiskey is, and they're pouring, everybody's from a newly opened bottle, and you got this part, somebody else got this part, and maybe, and who knows how long they've been sitting. I don't know how they're setting things up. And meanwhile, you've been practicing with whiskeys that have been open for a year, and you've had your particular, it's those little nuanced things that could be different that are sort of unavoidable. And this they're going to tell you, by the way, all our whiskeys have been poured and been sitting there for at least 30 minutes before you taste them. Unless you know that, that's just another challenge. That's just another challenge.
It is, but thankfully it's an equal challenge for everyone, right? Everyone is facing that same thing. I'll say that the way I went through that same kind of wrestling of like, WTF, guys, like how the heck is this supposed to be done? And I think if you go back to almost like an analytical or an engineering approach to it, and really focus on, actually, let me take a step back. I think a big jump that people need to make when they go down a deductive process is that the purpose of this is not to decide if you like it or not.
Right.
And it's not to give it a score.
Right.
And it is not to have, I've got 4 in front of me. It's not like I like 1 better than 2 and 2 better than 3. Right. And I like, that is not the purpose. And that's 99% of what we normally do as enthusiasts, right. Is like, I like it, right? Yeah. Yeah. And so the first thing, it took me months to get away from mentally trying to score it and mentally trying to think about what I like better and refocus my energies and efforts around what cask am I getting in here? What is the cask that's here? Can I find the X bourbon in here? Can I find the X sherry in here? What type of X sherry is this? Is this Alba? Is this Rober? And the moment it took a while, and once that clicks, you can imagine there being a really large decision tree that allows you to largely get into the right neighborhood, almost independent of where your glass got poured from, neck pour or bottom. Sure. Because you know that certain producers are always going to be X bourbon. You know, some folks are always going to be 100% sherry. And you can kind of quickly start to eliminate wide swaths of space to make this kind of a little bit more of an approachable problem. But it takes, like, I literally have I don't have my book here. I have like the gnarliest, like handwritten, like decision tree. Right. That is like, all right, if I capture, peat, this is the part of the tree I need to go down. If I capture sherry, strong sherry, I go down here. If I capture, I don't know what it is. If I capture funk, it's in here. And over 4 to 5 months, that tree got refined and refined and refined and refined. And I'm like, all right, how do I make the peat, the smoky phenolic part of this better? So it's that kind of approach and process that I think allows you to get past the batch to batch variation that you're going to find. We're all going to find it.
So it's similar to you go down different paths in wine. Is you simultaneously try to figure out what's the grape, and then is it old world or new world? Cabernet Sauvignon, Napa Valley, Mediterranean climate is different than Cabernet Sauvignon based wine coming out of Bordeaux, which is maritime. So you first kind of go, is it old world or new world based on these certain traits? Okay, I'm going to go old world because of these traits. Then you go, okay. Then you start going down, you continue on down as to narrowing down as to what direction you're going to. So there's certain couple things, and I'll talk about this because nobody else talks about this. There's a couple things I'm kind of been working on in my own mind. One is the sensation of a bite or tingle in a whiskey can come from just higher ABV. Mm-hmm. It can from a young spirit. It hasn't been matured, and so they're rounding those edges off, and then spice, which could, hence you could think a Maker's Mark is a high right bourbon if it's got some spice from somewhere. And if you guys watch the listen to the podcast.
While you get it, I'll explain kind of what happened here. So while the Master of Scotch exam was going on in Kentucky, right in parallel, literally in the same room with us as candidates, were the Master of Bourbon candidates as well too. And an interesting thing that came out was that there was a bourbon expression that was put in front of everyone that everyone got wrong. Every single person got this thing wrong, and they got it wrong in the exact same way. And, in retrospect, everyone's like, oh man, these guys are a bunch of idiots. But literally every single person got called a Maker's Mark for those of you that don't know, it's a wheated bourbon. They called it a high rye, which is borderline comical, right? If you're kind of in that.
Yeah, because everybody knows it's a wheater. But you know what? There's a guy named Shayla. Whiskey Central is the name of her channel. She moves. I'm trying to remember where she's at now. She's an American. She was living in Mexico. Her and her husband lived in Mexico. I think they were in Portugal, and now they're looking to move somewhere else. I think she did that very same thing, and she was thinking of herself as, "Oh no, how can I do that?" Well, guess what? So let me ask you about that particular case. Do you think it was a distinctive character of the spirit or the cask? Something about that particular cask that was giving you herbal and maybe bourbon or licorice notes, or something that's distinctive to associate with a rye? What was it? Do you think?
I should ask Mark what it was that I thought it was. I mean, I've had plenty of makers, Mark, and I would never characterize it as spicy, right? I would never characterize it. So the other thing that's super important here is that when and where did they have it in their individual flights?
Oh, is it a lingering from something before?
And
that's a challenge. It's more of a challenge with spirits. Whiskey,
yeah, like if you have that Ardbeg 10 and then you try and have a Glenmorangie 10, like it's just going to take. It's not that you're not going to get the Glenmoe characteristic there. It's just going to be smeared around some other stuff. So I don't know when and how that group went about it. I don't know when and how where it was in the placement. I don't know. Yeah, there's so many variables. But look, Maker's Mark is known. I mean, in absolute terms, it's known for being relatively young, but it's wheated bourbon. Like that's the sweet spot for this stuff. So, who the heck knows? I don't know.
So this is a whiskey I'm going to be doing in upcoming review. I'll be recording it over the weekend. Some people refer to it as a beginner's whiskey, above 12 double wood. So it's a bourbon and sherry cask. I've got it down to the label now.
Mm-hmm.
It's 43% AB. Well, in the United States, it's 43 if you buy the 750. If you buy the 70 CL, it's 40 ABV.
Yep.
And this is a whole nother conversation. Some distilleries, now that they can export 70 CLs to the United States, are now only doing one bottling. And I'm wondering, is this now going to become 40 ABV in the United States? But that's a whole nother thing. So one of the things that was noticing about this is there was a spice to it that in my perception was based on the spice bite. If I couldn't determine that it's a spice bite, not an alcohol bite, I would think it was a higher ABV. Just based on that sensation. Yeah. But there are other factors, but you can't base an ABV based on one perception. It's body, mouthfeel, weight, and there are other things. Sweet alcohol can add sweetness too, but if you only narrow in on one aspect and go, it must be this, and you ignore everything else to it, then you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot on. So you have to determine ABV. What would you say? What are the various traits that you would say that you take and determine ABV level?
Oops, sorry, I lost the last part of that question there. How do I determine ABV?
What would you say you would use as flags, or your approach to it has this and this and this and this, rather than the pure subjective? It's sort of, this leans me towards higher ABVs. What are the things you're kind of looking for?
It's exactly what you said. And then it is making sure I don't drink anything remotely close to cask strength. So recalibrating way down such that 40, you need to be able to nail 40 every single time. Like 40 needs to be your baseline. I should be able to put anything in front of you and you should be able to nail 40. It's identifying, it's also kind of a process of elimination. Are there certain whiskeys out there that present a nose prickle above their ABV? There are a few out there that, like, oh my gosh, like this thing noses way higher than 40 or 43 or 46. And then to your kind of point, it is like, what does this body feel like? What does the palate feel like? And then I tend to find, a different finishing effect on slightly higher ABV kind of core expressions as well too. So I think in our exam, Glenn Farkless 105 was one of our expressions.
Oh yeah.
And
Wow. That's a big boy. That's 60 ABV.
Yep. And so I remember that in the exam, and I remember nosing it and immediately knowing that one of these is not like the other. This is to me a cast strength nose, because the nose prickle, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, right? Like this idea of the warming and cooling sensation happens on the nose, it happens on the palate, it happens on the finish. And if you start paying attention to what does this feel like on the nose, what is the level of prickle, that also helps you calibrate, am I going into something cast strength, and then I'm confirming that, and then the finish confirms it, and that's you. It's not a single variable here. It's all these things coming together to try and figure it out. But I think the most important thing is I cut out basically all cocktails, all other spirits, and I recalibrated myself way down to 40, such that like you get into the hobbyist space and everything is single cast strength all day long, and that's what you're drinking. You're going to have a very hard time differentiating 40 to 43 to 46 to 48 to 50, and you need to be able to know what those ABVs are, and they give you big clues. Like Ardbeg has this very interesting, unique range of ABV. So if you're nosing this compared to Lagavulin, like the ABV alone should allow you to identify, do I have a Lagavulin 16 or Corey Brecken or Ugadal? Because visually Lagavulin is colored and Ugadal is going to look nice and dark. So, if you're kind of going faster, you're at the end and you've got a bunch of these things, it's not hard to get these things confused. And you got to use everything. So I don't know if that helps, but that's it's many factors.
And it's kind of like you're telling me things I already know, but need to keep in mind.
Yeah.
You can forget what you know. Is don't ever zone in on one particular trait and put all your weight on that one flag.
Right.
And I'll give you an example. So I had a friend of mine take an exam, and so Pinot Noir or Burgundy and Nebbiolo, say Barolo, similar in color. They both had at youth they look like an older wine because they have that brick in color, which is what most reds look like when they get old. They had an earthy, so they have a similar earthy character. They have a similar fruit character. Barolo might be a little more mushroomy, but other than that, very earthy. On the palate, Pinot is low tannin, high acid. Barolo will take your lip and pull it up over your lip. It is tannic as fuck. And this friend of mine, he called a Barolo a Burgundy, and I'm like, dude, at what point did you make that decision? And I know he made the decision in his head and looking at it and smelling at it before he even tasted it, and so his brain was not paying attention to the tannin. And if he had paid attention to the tannin, he would have known, no, that ain't freaking Pinot Noir. It's gotta be raw. So in a similar fashion, in this, I'm talking to myself because you have to talk, Eric, don't forget, and as you talk yourself through things, is don't look for any one particular flag and jump on that one. Look at the whole picture of everything that's there and do the math.
There would be value in coming up with your own version. I know the thing that you posted in the Facebook group, right, for evaluatory, like deductive tasting. I would suggest that coming up with something that fits on a note card will be more useful as you go through this many expressions at a time, so that it structures your thinking and it forces you through the process every single time you sit in front of something. The other thing I mentioned earlier that I forgot to mention earlier that I ended up doing a lot of was kind of A/B testing, right? How does Ardbeg and Laphroaig smell differently? How does HP and Talisker smell differently? How do 218 smell differently? That A/B testing again of the ones that you confuse or the ones that might be close it's the comparison, right? Doing it by itself is, I don't even know, it's entirely useful. It's all, I found myself always doing 2, 3, 4 at a time to get a frame of reference. Like, this is richer than that one. This is thinner than that one. This is more rounded. This is warmer. This is cooler. The finish on this is better. I can taste, like we talked about earlier, right? Like you got that Bruichladdich maltiness, that spiciness from that Rack and Plow. Like, can you taste that? Can you find that on classic laddie? Just finding those, right? It's doing the work to understand what should the distillery produce? Can I find it in the core expressions? And if I can't, what are my reference points to know that Lagavulin is Lagavulin and Kalila is Kalila and Lafroy? Like in my mind, I see a lot of these flavors and notes in shapes and colors. I don't think it's that unusual, but a lot of people kind of say that, like it has a certain shape or it has a certain color. Lagavulin to me is extremely well produced.
I'll see the colors and shapes, but only after I've drinking a lot.
Yeah. I see some of these distillery characteristics as so. For example, Lagavulin to me is like if someone were to produce a well-made peated whiskey, like a production, like well Hollywood manicured, every hair is in place or not hair is in its place. That's Lagavulin to me. Like it is someone wanted to have it very well produced and it goes right down the middle.
Yeah, it's to be pretty. Yeah,
it is so pretty. I think Kalila fits in that same space for me. But then I get to like some Lafroigs and it gets a little bit funky. And so I think of Kilchoman and I think about these other characteristics in it around shapes and colors and yeah. So like some of these Diageo owned distilleries are such, kind of specimens of science and production that there's not a hair out of place. And so it's all of these things that kind of come together through comparison that helps you figure it out.
I've been sort of developing a profile for White and McKay. You think of Jura, think of Dalmore, and you think of Tullibardine. That completely different places in Scotland. But there's certain. It's almost like if I hear Eddie Van Halen on a Van Halen album, I recognize it, and if I hear him on Michael Jackson, I recognize it. Yeah, I remember when Beat It first came out, and I was like, "What the hell is that? Is Eddie Van Halen on Michael Jackson's song?" Before it was known that he was on it. I was like, "Man!" And then I've heard Carlos Santana be on other people's anthems and record. Hey, I think it's Carlos Santana,
Rob Thomas,
Santana. So it's that similar thing. Is there's something about those and something about those distilleries that it comes out of a philosophy of an owner that it would come across this way. So one of the things I'm working on and I haven't figured out yet. Okay, I think nobody else has done this. Is you can take a bourbon to sherry cask scale. On this far, it's 100% bourbon. On this far, it's 100% Oloroso cask. And then you have a range of not in terms of time spent in the cask, but in terms of the extraction of the cask and perception, to where you could go in the middle, be 50-50. Over here, if it's a 90-10, then it's mostly 90% bourbon cask influence, 10% bourbon influence, and sherry influence. All the way here, you go 100% sherry influence versus 90% sherry influence, maybe 10% bourbon. So they've pulled back on the bourbon notes and then work your way into the middle. Because if you're going to say what is casking, let's take Aberfeldy.
Yep.
Aberfeldy. Just looking at Aberfeldy, that doesn't really look like a sherry cask. I don't know why you can see that.
It looks like it on our screens. I don't know what anyone else is.
Yeah, it's light. Yeah, it's light. It's actually lighter than it was look on the camera. It's golden in color.
Yeah.
Of course, be a little E150 in there. It's very honeyed. You don't get another on the finish. You don't get a lot of the dried black fruit notes. So in my scale, I would put this at, in terms of my perception, maybe 80 to 90% bourbon cask with only 10% sherry cask influence.
Yep.
In terms of perception. But then do that with all other whiskeys.
Yeah.
And where are they on the spectrum?
Yep.
And how you perceive the influence. And this is me new thinking. I haven't worked this through. Whereas the Doublewood, it wasn't like this when I first opened, but now it's 50-50. Now it seems an even 50-50 between the sherry and the bourbon. But start to know whiskeys, and this is, I don't know anybody who thinks this way or talks this way, maybe I'm nuts. Is think this way and approach this way to getting to know whiskeys, are they primarily a sherry cask? Obviously, Highland Park, Glendronach, those are sherry nuts. Aberlour, but Aberlour can do 50-50s and anyway. So, but I guess that's sort of the next approach. But now I feel like, man, have I got enough time to absorb all this information?
Yeah.
Between now and May 2024.
I went down that exact same path where I got a long piece of paper and I made a scale, and I started to plot everyone on that scale to see where it was. The problem is that all this stuff is multidimensional. That's the real problem. The real problem isn't that left to right scale of bourbon to sherry, or because even within that, what Adam and I figured out very quickly is that sherry, yes, the infill has obviously a major impact on what's happening to the new make spirit, but so does the type of wood. So you can have American sherry, you can have European sherry. Yeah. And so, okay, so now do I have another axis that goes for the on the bourbon side? Like, okay, so I know it's always going to be Alba, right? Got it. But on the sherry side, now I know there's actually multiple types of sherry and sherry casks.
Right. So I did a whole series. I don't know if you ever watched. I did a whole series on sherry and sherry cask finished whiskeys, and I've taught a couple classes on it. Is they don't. So the terminology, they don't always reveal what the source of what for the oak was. Traditionally, Rioja, Ribera del Duero, Jerez used American oak.
That's right.
For a number of different reasons. But the problem is in the industry, they will call it Spanish oak.
Spanish oak. Yeah.
But they don't mean that it came from a Spanish forest.
So the question is, can you taste through the marketing? That's the question. Can you taste through what the marketing's saying? And then, like, I'll tell you this, like during our when we were going through this, I would hit up brand ambassadors on Instagram to verify what we were tasting.
They're not always the most revelatory either. Sometimes they're not a lot. They're kind of given a script sometimes.
Yeah, but I mean, like usually they'll like if you're talking about casks, like if you're like, hey, do you guys ever use bourbon casks? They'll usually say yes or no. Like that. I'm not asking them like the deep dark secrets of how many ages are in this vatting. I just want to make sure that like, hey, when I taste modern day HP 12, it doesn't taste fully sherry. It tastes like there's some bourbon in here. And anyone that's had HP Highland Park from the 90s or even the early noughts, the taste difference is sad.
I'm just looking for a bottle while you're talking about this. So this is a fantastic whiskey. This is the Glengoyne cask strength from what year is this? I don't remember.
Hey, Whiskey, what is your Whiskey? What do you mean the real problem is the huge gap of price since 2 years? Expand on that while Eric figures out his Glengoyne cask situation.
The real problem is the huge gap of price since in 2 years. Well, yeah, in the last 2 years, but so just a few years ago, I could pick up an Ardbeg 10-year-old for $46. It then went up to $55. I think the latest one I just bought, was $67 in a very short period of time.
Yeah.
But it's not just the prices have gone up. It's that there's been rapid inflation in the dollar period.
Yeah.
And so it's not just a whiskey thing. It's an entire economy thing. I mean, how much the prices and how much of that is the cost of gas? Just transportation and get some we're still paying over $5 a gallon here in California. So with increase of price of gas, increase of transportation, increase of
everything.
It's there we go. And don't forget, 72%, at least that I can think of, it goes to taxes. And they ain't lowering that in so you have to keep with that. But anyway, so this is in terms of like in my perception. So the color of this, similar to the Aberfeldy. This is a sherry cask. One of the things that can coming away in the series on, you have Fino, you had Amontillado, you have Pelo Catado, Oloroso, and Pedro Jimenez sherry cask. Is tasted blind. This is very similar to an Amontillado cask because when you in dialing in the sherry cask with bourbon cask, it starts to imitate, at least my palate, imitate the characteristics of an Amontillado, which has a combination of oxidative and biological aging. I know I'm going off deep into
yeah. So you get that? Do you get a little lactic funk?
Not lactic. It's just a nuttier character starts coming across, and more almond or almond. It's just not the dark fruit notes that you get in a strictly Oloroso in a 100% Oloroso cask. It's just dialing in. So it's in calibrating my own brain is okay. It has these traits. I think sherry cask, but I think because of these influences and how it's been dialed down a little bit, I think it's also got bourbon influence in there. So it's a combination of bourbon cask, sherry cask. It's similar to the way you can perceive vintages of wine based on these characteristics, how things have changed or age. What was that climate like? What was the weather like for that year?
Yeah.
Or this is probably these characteristics. It's been sitting in the bottle this long.
Yeah.
And it's sort of calibrating your brain to perceive the cask influence. Again, taste. I think the
other thing that we didn't talk about is that there's a really big difference between doing the type of work you're talking about here and then sitting around with a YouTube video going on in the background and just tasting it. The tasting that we're talking about here for deductive analysis is really painful. Like, it is not fun. I remember coming to the end of the exam and being so excited to not have to have whiskey, like to not
burnout,
do this every freaking night.
Burnout.
Because there's there's no music going on. There's no TV in the background. There's no YouTube video. My phone I've got a separate stopwatch to time myself here. It's not enjoyable. Like, it is not a fun pursuit to go down. But to your point, like, that's what it takes to calibrate and really pay attention to what is in the glass and what are all of my senses telling me about what type of sherry is this? Because PX tastes different than
Oloroso. You're getting more of the prune notes rather than just raisin and fig notes.
Yeah.
So, and this is the challenge. This is maybe psychological and emotional challenge. And I've had this and we talked about earlier, I don't do anything, halfway, 110%. Not only can I burn myself on it, but the joy and the fun of it can be lost in the pursuit of the sport-like achievement.
Oh, 1,000%, especially for something like this.
Yeah. And so you have to kind of, for yourself, why am I doing this? What's my intention? Yeah. But also know, you know what? Eventually this will be over and I'll be done and I can go back to a normal life.
That's sort of the good news is you carry it with you, but
but you can get back to a normal life. But so being an academic nut, I would love Christmas time in the summers because you had a break in the semester.
Yeah.
And so I've got a stack of books in here. It's not that I wasn't still reading. It's just I wasn't reading with the pressure that I'm going to take an exam.
And someone's going to ask you about that part of that question. Right. Talk to me about the temperature of the third wash in the third waters in the mashing. What's the temperature?
And so I would actually buy books, same topic, but they're not textbooks required for a class.
Right.
They're books I want to read, not books I have to read. And there are books that we're going to sit there until the semester break in the summertime. And you have to kind of have that same thing is there's a difference between study time and sitting around enjoying a dram in a rocks class, watching a movie. You're not analyzing it to death.
I don't think I'm allowed to comment in the chat, but I'll send you a text or a message of this. But there needs to be a love of this, right? You better enjoy doing this independent of any sort of accreditation or certification. And so a function of that is finding other books and resources and knowledge to round out what's on the syllabus. And so the American Distillers Institute actually has a number of books that are fantastic.
Oh.
Yeah. And
American
we were
distillers.
talking about casks and cask dialing and what is the impact of it. They also have a great graphic that talks about the kind of the balance between new make and new make characteristics and cask influence over time and age, and you put it all together, and it's this really elegant kind of diagram that shares, you know, when do things start to drop off relative to one another. So there was a book by Matt Strickland called Cask Management. Basically, you should go to the American Distillers Institute and try and purchase every book that looks interesting. They've got books on distilling, they've got books on cask management, they've got books on those were the two that, you know, we kind of really honed in on. And then there's a gentleman by the name of Philip Pip. No, that's not right. He has a book called Appreciating Whiskey. It's old. It's 23 years old. But he is the founder of the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, and he produced.
Okay.
Yeah, it is fantastic. It is fantastic. Yeah. It's thin, but there's some information in every one of these books. You're going to find one or two nuggets that no one else covers. And Philip's book does a great job of capturing some of the science around mashing and fermentation that we didn't find anyplace else. I think it's going to be added to the curriculum based on our recommendations for maybe not this next year, but the exam afterwards.
So do you think it was just mostly helpful, or do you think this is in your best interest of beyond the required or recommended reading of the reading list is, no, there are some other books you really need to get into that they're really going to help you out on this? So in the semester on a particular topic, there's 5 to 10 books the professor had, and then here was recommended reading.
Yeah.
And before the semester started, I would read all these, and I would read these. And if that professor wrote things, I would read what he wrote.
You're a better student than I ever was. I never did
anything.
Nerd. I was terrible at school. Like, I never read any of that stuff at all. It's different now. Like, I don't know, now that you're not out of school, and maybe there's a love of this just independent of having to go through school. So I think it depends, not dissimilar to the way we talked about your own individual sensory analysis and what your process is your own individual way of learning and consuming information. I have a friend by the name of Sam. Sam can hear something once, like auditorially, and it's etched in his brain, and that's it. And that is not me. That is not the way I operate in any way, shape, or form. So know thyself. I am the type of individual that does really well by hearing the same kind of concept from 4 different sources in 4 different ways. Yes. So my brain can come up with its own way of codifying it and crystallizing it so that when it's game time, I can regurgitate it. That's my path.
So when I was studying a particular subject, I'd get 10 different books on it because some books say it better than others.
Yeah. And they say it differently, and they emphasize different parts, and they explain it differently, and they compare it, and they have different analogies, and they think about the structure differently, and they think about the process differently. So to me, that is exactly why I went off the beaten path and tried to, I think I told you this backstage or previously, between myself and Adam, I feel like we have acquired almost every single book about whiskey kind of in print or available, not just on Amazon, like going to used book sites, going to ADI, going and finding PDFs, you know, if it was available, we tried to grab it. Again, it goes back to this idea of if you've got an unbound problem in front of you, and they can ask you anything about anything, because technically, when you think about column stills, and we talked about bourbon a little bit, what is that but grain whiskeys and Scotch, which they can ask you about. Right. It may not be in the blind tasting, but it certainly is going to be a function. It's such a major function of Scotch and Scotch history. It's going to be asked about in some way, shape, or form. So,
yeah, and I think because if people only look at the 24 producers and wrongly think, oh, then I really don't need to know that much about blended whiskeys and all that, because look, they're not part of the 24 producers. Yeah, maybe not the blind tasting, but in the theory part, yeah, it could definitely be on there. So you better know that shit.
Yeah, it's problematic if you're trying to study for something and there's no syllabus. It's just, hey, know everything about this.
Yeah, and eventually, I mean, down the road as things develop, they'll continue to get refined and at the recommendations of those who've already passed. Hey, what would you go forward? Well, maybe we should do this. Maybe we should do that.
Yeah.
And things are continuing refined. But along the way, the tests also might get more and more difficult.
It'll be different for sure, right? It'll become different for sure. I'll say one of the things, without getting into the specifics, is that, even between the first examination and the second examination, they made, I think, what we would all characterize as good changes to the way, they're kind of calibrating judges and candidates and making sure that it's a effective mechanism of evaluating individuals. So I'm very much heartened by the fact, or I'm very happy to see and hear about the way that the board is engaging with candidates and people that have passed, get feedback and improve it. And that's the beauty of getting into an organization like this relatively early in its journey, right? It's the ability.
Okay, so I'm going to bring up a comment, and together we need to say, fuck you, Dustin. You still too gone, man. I just ran the store and bought more Springbank. Fuck you, Dustin.
I love the cast strength, Dustin. I'm a massive Springbank fan.
Well, I'm going to be working there for 5 days.
I know you're going to the freaking school. Like, you better be streaming the shit out of that if they allow you to.
Well, the funny thing is, so I found out so Thursday, July 6th is my birthday. So on my birthday, we'll be doing bottling. And we get to bottle our own. So I mean, what better birthday than that? So
can I nerd out for a second with Dustin? He got a 4th bottle of Hazelburn 12 Oloroso. 57.1 was my favorite cast strength, and I've got a closet full of cast strengths. The Dustin, I just grabbed one of my unicorn Springbanks. You would be familiar with this, I'm sure others would be too. The double, the Springbank 12 double for the US import. So yeah.
Wow.
Nerd City.
Wow. Hazelburns. If I could do time travel, I used to, there's this. Oh yeah, the Springbank. Yeah, the hit. I didn't think twice. They were always there. There were all these whiskey, and now you're like, holy cow, now you can't find them anymore. And you're like, what the hell, man? But Hazelburn, they're hard to come by, and they're unbelievably expensive. And they weren't that way a short time ago. But
they used to be sitting at Total Wine like 2 years ago. Like this stuff was sitting at Total
Wine. And it's all Dustin's fault. That's what really pisses me off.
So for those of you that don't know, the one that Dustin and I were just kind of going back and forth on, I'm saying we're going back and forth on chat and voice. So there was a time period here in the 90s when Springbank was looking to release a 12-year-old. And what had happened was that they had a bunch of very overaged whiskeys that had dropped below 40%. And one of the regulations for SWA is that you cannot bottle something that's under 40%. So they took this 12-year-old Springbank,
right,
and they got it down to ABV by blending it with overaged 35 to 40-year-old Springbank as opposed to water. Wow. And so it's this 12-year-old Springbank that looks like black syrup because it's 12-year-old Springbank, and then about 60% of it is 35-year-old to 40-year-old Springbank that's under ABV. So utterly insane. That's what the double dark is for those folks that ever want to nerd out.
So this will be my second trip to Springbank. I've been to Springbank before. I'm hoping, yes, I want to have fun. Yes, I want to have fun, but it's more important for me that I learn as much as I can and extract as much as I can, because there's book knowledge and then there's experiential knowledge. And, you can read a book about automotive repair, but if you haven't put your head under the hood and actually, taken apart an engine and rebuilt it, then you really don't know. And so I'm, and I'm saying you got to spend like Vic, he's worked there worked at Glenmorangie for 19 years, but at least, my experience working in a winery was a semester here, a semester there. And that was the extent of it. Just for the class, so I could get the class credits and learn. But I think at least a weekend, I can at least get a better glimpse of it, and things will when I read something, I'm like, oh, okay, it sinks better into my head there. So that's my hope.
I think I registered for the Springbank school in 2019 or 2020, and they emailed me back. I'm like, oh yeah, no problem. It's a 5-year wait. I'm like, all right.
Yeah, I've been on that list for a while. So here's a funny. It was actually so Dustin, Daniel Whittington and I were actually signed up to take it together. And so when the invitation came for Daniel and I, Daniel couldn't go because he had other arrangements. Yeah. So I asked Taylor, hey, Taylor, you want to go? And so that's how Taylor and I are going to the Springbank school.
He's going to the Springbank school?
Yeah. So Taylor,
man.
We're gonna meet up in London. He's come from Colorado, London. We'll meet up in London. And then we're flying over to Glasgow. And then it was back on the 1st. And then we drive to Androsson and take Androsson over to Campbelltown. We spent a week there in Campbelltown. And then we had a Norris stay at Stonefield Castle. And then like 7 miles down the road is that ferry. We take that to Isla, spend like 4 or 5 days on Isla, and then from there to Edinburgh. Anyway, so yeah. So the both of us are going on that. I think it's gonna be a great experience. So,
I mean, incredible.
Yeah.
So,
for me, I mean, when I talk about wine, it's what the personal experience I had and the discussions I had with the winemaker. And I'm hoping more. I want to do more and more of that. Is in-depth, geeky instruction conversations, not with reps. I'm sorry, no offense if you're not no offense to reps, but to the people who actually work in the distillery, whether it's a malting floor, or even if it's bottling or anything else, to get a deeper understanding of things. So we're coming up at 2 hours.
So we're just getting started, I think, right?
Yeah.
How was your 10? Talk to me about that. So did the 10 come of itself?
So I'm happy. So yes, it did. So the main thing is there is with more oxidation, more aeration. I don't like to say more aeration. The various components become much more harmonized and intermingled, rather than I taste this note and then this note and then this note. They become much more integrated. So this one, which is neck pour, is much more integrated. Even the slightly softer on the palate, but in terms of what the notes are there, it's just someone's changed the equalizer a little bit. But which I'm happy. I was just like I was having that damn it moment from a neck pour that it was so bizarre. But I've had neck pours of other Ardbeg 10s. I'd never experienced it before, so I'm very happy. I'm very happy about that.
Yeah.
So they're both, I think, within a range of classic Ardbeg 10s. So I'm happy about that.
I'm always blown away by how pale Ardbeg 10 is. Always blown away.
And it's actually, there's a slight tinge of green. And if you get the light to hit it, it's almost like goldish green.
Yeah.
It looks like so. And then I'm always thinking wine. Sauvignon Blanc looks like that. That's what Sauvignon Blanc looks like. So during a test, I said, "Oh, it looks like Sauvignon Blanc." Oh, could be Ardbeg. Ardbeg thing.
I know. If I recall correctly, Mark from the Bourbon Life podcast, when he walked into his bourbon blind, I think he identified one, maybe two of them straight up visually, because in bourbon they're not adding color, right? For us in the Scotch world, they're adding color. So it's like, if it's pale, I can make a judgment because nobody's adding color to make it look like this. But the moment it gets dark,
Cool Climate Riesling can look like that as well. Cool Climate Riesling can look that. Another thing that can look that as well. So I think other than some people do things for bragging rights, which is fine if that's what you want to do. I don't care. Of course, to say that, I find that's what you care. That's very sort of condescending. No, you actually really do care. You're being judgmental, but you don't want to come across as judgmental, so you have to say that. Because you don't want to come across as a dick, so say that. All right. So, I think I pursue all these things not to add more things to my resume because I'm not planning on going into the business per se. Because I want questions answered, and it's in the pursuit of stuff that and of course, for every answer you get, you have 10 more questions.
Yep.
But it's also for me, for some people, I'm really into climbing mountains. You know what? I made it a thing. I'm going to climb Mount Everest. There's a master of wine. This is years ago. It's still on YouTube. He's in was it Australia or New Zealand? He was like the first master of wine of, I'm going to say New Zealand. And he referred to his pursuit of becoming an MW as that was his Mount Everest. And for some people, it might be an academic degree. Some people might be, hey, I'm the 2023 pipeline champion, at Hawaii, surfing, or whatever it is, and so these kind of things are for me something to push toward and goals to shoot for. And once I pass it, then I'm going to look for something else. I'm just going to move on to whatever else is
level 4.
Level 4. Well, there are other things in my life other than whiskey. I have a couple ideas for books. So for me, I have a couple of whiskey books I want to write.
Yeah.
But then I have other completely unrelated academic interests that I've mapped out in my head that I want to write on. So there are other things. But it's always why I do this is, and everybody has their different reasons. Some is, well, I want to go into the business, and therefore I'm doing this. It will give, if I write a book and see if you get it published, it would add credibility to the book. But it's also, and this is a somewhat personal moment. So in 2013, so I was already into wine and gone back to college to earn wine, and I had some certification from WSET. One of the major motivations for when I decided, I'm going to spend the money and time to become a certified sommelier is in 2013. 2 weeks before I started the study, my mother died. And I was the trustee and the executor of the will.
Yeah.
My father had died in 2009. And there's more to the story than this, but I'm not going to go into it. Just I'll start crying. But I had this huge load. It's the banks and the lawyers and the accounts and a house they'd been in since 1967 that's full of stuff. I got to figure out how to get rid of. I spent every holiday, every vacation, all my PTO just trying to get the house ready to sell.
Yeah.
And it was just, I needed something else in my life.
Yep.
To put my mind on that wasn't
this.
Yes.
Yeah.
But same thing with work. Work can be stressful. I love my job, but it can also be stressful. And we talked this before we went live. I was like, Frankenstein or something, before we went live, and I had a drama or something. But it can also be something that's like, it's a reminder of, okay, it's not politics. It's not Republicans and Democrats and all the bullshit that's going on there. It's not all the whatever thing you can think of that you hear about in the really bad news. It's a reminder that there's still things in life worth living for. Mm-hmm. There's still things that are enjoyable in life for. There are things in life to be thankful for. There are things in still to achieve, to push yourself to a level of excellence, whether it's this or woodworking or guitar playing or whatever else so much of the path they choose to go into, is find something in your life that, I'm going to become the best I can be at whatever this is.
And it doesn't matter what it is.
Purpose. Mr. Agent Smith versus Mr. Anderson. There's this long tribe where he goes on talking about purpose and without purpose, and so forth. It's something that can give you focus, but it's also a discipline. That same discipline to do this will give you the ability to be disciplined in other pursuits. And your discipline and your other achievements, were, even though it's not whiskey, set you up to pursue this, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so this is sort of the takeaway is, why do you do this? And everybody has their own different cause and reason for it. But for me is it's something that's not work or the regular work. And it's something that it's a goal. This year I'm going back to Scotland. This year I'm going to do this. In 2024, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this and this and this and this and this. And it's this constant thing to push through all the bullshit times.
Mhm.
Okay, all that's bullshit's going on, but there's this other thing I'm pursuing, and that's my drive for keep going. You know,
It's I feel like my dad told me this recently, but it's like the currency today, like, is your ability to be curious and learn new things. That's kind of what it's about, right?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
You can take that mindset and apply it to anything kind of going on in your space, in your world, but woe to those people that are no longer curious about what is around them and out there.
Right.
So
Right.
look, this is Erik Wait Whiskey Studies, not like that is why we're talking about this, because we're curious about that kind of the nerdy educational side of this journey. And I think the nice thing about this is, without expectations on the other side of this, Erik, are some really interesting opportunities. Like, and I think, John, I haven't forgotten about your question. Like, what happens on the other end of this? I have, I would say, a pretty good friend of mine that now started working on a book.
Yeah.
Started working on a book. Yeah. Top shelf dust and dropping the heat. And, you know, a few of us were invited.
That's a title for a book, man. Yeah. I'm going to steal that. I'm going to steal that and put that in a t-shirt and a coffee mug.
I think there are, so, you know, a few of us got invited after the last exam to participate in the international whiskey competition. Like, there's no scenario where random folks get invited to that type of event to go and do that. I mean, like, that is absolutely, utterly next level. And, you know, I think there's two main things that kind of came out of this entire process. One was external calibration and validation on your palate, your philosophy, your approach against folks like Lou Bryson and Michael Veach and David Broom, like folks involved in this organization, Sebastian. I mean, the palates and the knowledge and the experience associated with this is just nothing that you would ever imagine. And we didn't actually talk about this, but you're basically stuck with the judges for a week. And so it's not that you do your little part and then you're segregated off. You're engaging with them continuously, and you're able to talk to them and engage with them and get feedback from them. And it turns out that they're humans as well too, and they like to talk about this stuff and drink this stuff and eat food and share all this stuff. And so the ability to have these types of conversations and to get the external calibration against these folks, and then at the other end of it, they have been nothing but warm and accommodating and just welcoming to. So there's a group right now of the folks that have passed the exam, and it's the board members and the folks that have passed the level 3. And the types of conversations that we're able to get into in there would be a whiskey nerd's dream.
Sure,
right.
Sure.
It's like we talked about this earlier, Erik, about there's some really
part of a community,
but there's also some really interesting conversations that happen on Reddit, right? Like, I think I mentioned to you that someone on Reddit mentioned that you had done the Ardbeg challenge, and it was challenging for the 4, and you got 1 right, and then you got 3 right. And those are, there's plenty of review sites out there. That's going to happen. And in certain pockets of these communities, you get these really interesting conversations. And what I really like about what's forming now from this board and this group and this community of individuals that really are interested in asking the why now or what next, but aren't at the point where they're like saying you must wear an ascot and a suit, and it must be done this way, and it must be neat. It's that, I would call it like the modern balance. Right, the curiosity. We're looking to make it as accessible as possible. How many people can we pull into this? How many people can we share this with, and how much can we learn along the way? And ultimately, like, what are the people and the connections we can make with it?
I think one of the things I'm talking to myself, I'm trying to remind myself, Erik, don't be just about the pursuit of the ends. Enjoy the ride. Enjoy get into getting there.
It's hard.
It's difficult, but enjoy the route along the way. Yeah. And
no one wants to take an international trip and then fail the exam. Let me tell you what.
I know.
I mean, let me tell you what. I don't even want to take a domestic trip and fail the exam. Like, It is,
I would rather fail a Scotch exam in Scotland than to fail it in Kentucky.
Oh my God.
Because at least I was in freaking Scotland. So
Yeah.
this summer will be my 3rd trip. I'm planning my 4th trip. But my plan is, when I mentioned this off is camera, is get there a week ahead of time so that my body has adjusted to the clock. Because jet lag's no joke. It takes 3 days at least and it's worse coming back.
Yeah.
The jet lag coming back is worse than going there.
Yeah.
But this is my current plan: is be there, spend the morning visiting a distillery, in the afternoon studying. So it'll be but enjoy the journey, enjoy the trip, enjoying being there, enjoying the entire process.
I had a friend that went there.
Take with the academic seriousness that you're there to achieve.
My friend Sam went there early for his exam in Scotland, and I think after this exam I asked him, like, so did you enjoy your week there? He's like, no, it was just total crap. Like, you're just so stressed out getting ready for this exam.
Right.
We got bourbon and horse.
Well, he says, what's wrong with it's fine if you're studying for a bourbon exam. I wouldn't want to take a bourbon exam in Scotland. I would want to take it in Kentucky.
So the council is going to bounce back and forth between Kentucky and Scotland. So I actually took my Master of Scotch exam in Kentucky.
Right.
Dustin, it was absolutely beautiful. It was amazing. It was wonderful, especially afterwards. Funny, wonderful story. Here's an example, John, of what happened afterwards. So we passed the exam. I've been basically spending the last 9 months studying for this thing. So you pass the exam and there isn't any letdown. Like, there wasn't any joy. It was just like, okay, the exam is done. And I'm still like, kind of frenetic in the studying mode. And one of the council members decided to allow a couple of us that passed along on some business that he needed to take. So I'm not going to say the distillery or what it is, but we walk into a very well-known distillery, and he finds his point of contact, whoever it is that he needs to meet with. And we start getting like, the person comes down, finds us, and starts taking us back up into some part of into the headquarters. And while we're walking there, the vice president of product happens to just stumble across us while we're in the hallway. And he's like, oh, you guys just, so-and-so. And, he knows the council member, and he knows the judges. He's like, guys, come on over in here. And he took us into a conference room. And what he put in front of us was basically a flight of products that they were evaluating. And he's like, on Monday, we need to make a decision on what it is that we're going to do with this type of stuff. So he basically blinded us on all these products that they were going to go do. And he started to go into this, like, oh, sample A is from this distillery and sample B is, and we're like, no, don't tell us. Let us do an evaluation of, like, let's kind of see what this is. And so, the group of 6 of us kind of went, I think there were 3 judges and kind of 3 folks that had just passed. We went through it. And then at the end, we, rattle off, hey, I like A and I like B for this and I like C for this, but I think you should go with A. And he nodded with us like, that's what we're going with. And so 3 days later is what they ended up modeling that as a product. But that's the type of, man, never in a million years would I have thought we would have gotten access to be able to go and just kind of hang out and nerd out like that.
So it opens doors to other experiences that you wouldn't have other experience. And so, and I've had a lot of those in the wine world. I'm starting to get them. I get invitations, but I don't have the time. Already in the whiskey world, I get contacts. Hey, Erik, we're I'm like, I gotta work. I can't get on a plane and fly to wherever.
Yeah.
Weekend, and so I have more invitations than I have time for at the moment. But yeah, so when people realize you're on the right, you become on the radar.
Yeah.
You become on the radar. Oh, this is one of those guys. You get in whether it's Whiskey Business Weekly or whatever the media source is, you come on the radar there, as well as you get to know people who are going to know you on a first name basis, and so forth.
I'll end with this, that I feel like I can speak for all the folks that have passed, and that this feels like it's the very beginning of it. Like, no one is rolling around being like, I'm a master. No one is saying they're a master of jack shit. All that this is the opportunity to go and engage with palates and minds and experience that does not spend any time on the internet. Like your master distillers out there are generally not hanging out on YouTube, and they're not generally spending time on Reddit. And a lot of them don't even bother checking their email. They're like busy doing actual stuff. And it's been an absolute gift to be given kind of a platform or the ability to just engage with these folks. Not that they wouldn't engage with, like you could cold email most of these folks, all of these folks, and they'd respond to you. But to have something that resembles an ongoing interaction and relationship with them has been, and for those that are curious and are interested in whiskey and are interested in spirits and want to know why this has been, you couldn't ask for more.
So I put a link, and this is non-paid advertisement. I put a link for the Council of Whisky Masters in the description box below. So if you want to learn more about the organization, of course, you could always Google it, but there is in the description box below a link to the Council of Whisky Masters. Again, it's not paid. I've not been asked. I
don't work for them. I'm not paid either.
Don't work for them. Everybody knows I make my real money, stripping on the weekend. I'm a pole dancer. That's what I'm doing.
It's hard. It's hard work.
Yeah, it's
tough.
Well, those little ladies, man, they really like to stuff the the G-string, man. That's when I make my real money. So hey, so yeah, this is said in one of the Saw movies. There's always someone who learns from someone who then learns from someone who learns from someone. There's a Jedi who teaches a Jedi Knight who then teaches a Padawan, and that there's a responsibility. And once I take a responsibility of once you pass something, to then pass it on and help other people out. There have been people I've helped out with, in order to get into WSET and then with the Court of Master. I used to run the study group for the Court of Master Sommeliers. They had like 7,000 people in there. Is to pass on what you've learned and benefit from, and you've learned from masters of wine, masters of master sommeliers, or whatever it is, to then pass it on. Yeah. So you're the first person from the Council of Whisky Masters that I have benefited from in direct contact. And I want to say thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah.
For passing on your experiences. And one of these days we will be joined. It might not be Ardbeg. It'll be something else. We'll get together and we'll share a dram.
I'm just down the road for you. Look, couldn't agree with you more. And folks have done that for us. And I can't wait to see you. Hopefully we'll see each other before we are in Scotland.
Yep. But, so if you're ever if you're ever up here in Half Moon Bay, or if you want to go to Star Trek convention down there in Pasadena.
No, but I'll meet you afterwards or around or before. Eric,
right, I want to give everyone who's watching, and if you haven't liked this already, give it a thumbs up and all that nonsense. And if you're watching on the replay, thumbs up. If you have a question on the replay, I try to be very dutiful about responding to comments. Leave a question down below, and I will try to get back to you to answer your question. All right. So next time, hey, everyone have a great weekend. I've got Monday off. Looking forward to that. I am going to do blind tasting live stream probably on Sunday, if not Monday, since I have Monday off. All righty. Till next time. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.